Countdown to Halloween 2022, featuring eerie and uncanny tales of haunts, ghosts, and suspense. Every Monday at exactly midnight, a new story will appear on Storylink Radio's YouTube channel as we count down to Halloween 2022. You will have 7 days to listen, then the next one will appear. Each story will be 13 to 30 minutes long. And now, tonight's story from Storylink Radio. Oh, February, the month of romance. And what can be more romantic than an entire month's worth of vampire stories? And so, let us begin. The Last of the Vampires by Phil Robinson. Tonight's story was originally published in the March 1893 issue of the Contemporary Review and features a most unusual vampire. Do you remember the discovery of the man-lizard bones in a cave on the Amazon? And I know sometime in the 60s? Yeah, perhaps you don't. But it created a great stir at the time in the scientific world, I'll tell you. And in a lazy sort of way, interested men and women of fashion. Yes, for a day or two there, it was quite the correct thing for Belgravia to talk of connecting links, of the evolution of man from the reptile, and the reasonableness of ancient myths that spoke of centaurs and mermaids as actually existing. Yes. Yes, the fact was that a German Jew, an India rubber merchant working his way with the usual mob of natives through a cahucho forest along the Maranhão, came upon some bones on a riverbank where he had pitched his camp. Idle curiosity made him try to put them together, and when he found to his surprise that he had before him the skeleton of a creature, yes, a creature with human hands and feet, and a dog-like head and immense bat-like wings. Being a shrewd man, he saw the possibility of money being made out of such a curiosity. So he put all the bones he could find into a sack, and on the back of a llama they were in due course conveyed to Chachapoyos and then on to Germany. Unfortunately, his name happened to be the same as that of another German Jew who had just then been trying to hoax the scientific world with some papyrus rolls of a date anterior to the flood, and who had been found out and put to shame. So, when his namesake appeared with the bones of a winged man, yes, he was treated with scant ceremony. However, he sold his India rubber very satisfactorily, and as for the aforementioned bones, he left them with a young medical student of the ancient University of Berenwurst, and went back to his cahucho trees and his natives in the banks of the Amazon, and there was an end of him, eh? Ah, yes, but then our young medical student one day put his fragments together, and do what he would, he could only make one thing of them, a winged man with a dog's head. There were a few ribs too many, and some odds and ends of backbone which were superfluous. What else could be expected of the anatomy of so extraordinary a creature, after all? From one student to another, the facts got about, and at last the professors came to hear of it, and, well, to cut a long story short, the student's skeleton was taken to pieces by the learned heads of the college and put together again by their own learned hands. And they, too, do what they would, could only make one thing of it, a winged man with a dog's head. Well, the matter now became serious. The professors were at first puzzled and then got quarrelsome, and the result of their squabbling was that pamphlets and counterblasts were published, and so all the world got to hear of the bitter controversy about the man-lizard of the Amazon. And here, of course, we're speaking of the geographical region along the great river of the Amazon, not the evil corporate giant Amazon, or they had not really been brought about yet. But anyway, I digress. So on this heated argument, one side declared, of course, that such a creature was an impossibility, and that the bones were a clever hoax, a remarkably clever hoax. They must be, after all. The other side retorted by challenging the skeptics to manufacture a duplicate and publishing the promise of much large rewards to anyone who could succeed in doing so. That the museum was beset for months by competitors. But no one could manufacture another man lizard. The man part was simple enough, sure, provided they could get a human skeleton. But at the angles of the wings were set huge claws, black, polished, curved, and nothing that ingenuity could suggest would imitate them. And then the genuinists, as those who believed in the monster called themselves, set the imposturists another poser. For they publicly challenged them to say what animal either had the head or wings belonged to, if not to the man lizard. And the answer was never given. And so victory remained with them, but not, alas, the bones of contention. For the imposturists, by bribery and burglary, got access to the precious skeleton, and lo, one morning the glory of the museum had disappeared. The man half of it was left, but the head and wings were gone. And from that day to this, no one has ever seen them again. Which of the two parties were right? Well, as a matter of fact, neither, as the following fragments of narrative will go to prove. Once upon a time, so say the Zaporo Indians who inhabit the district between the Amazon, the river, not the evil corporate giant, and the Maranhão, there came across the Pampas de Sacramento a company of gold seekers, white men, who drove the natives from their workings and took possession of them. They were the first white men who had ever been seen there. The Indians were afraid of their guns. But eventually treachery did the work of courage, for pretending to be friendly, the natives sent their women among the strangers, and they taught them how to make the tocupe out of breadfruit, but did not tell them how to distinguish between the ripe and the unripe. And so the wretched white men made tocupe out of the unripe fruit, which brings on fits like epilepsy. And when they were lying about the camp helpless, the Indians attacked them and killed them all. Well, all except 3. And these 3 they gave to the vampire. But what was the vampire? Well, the Zaporos did not know. Very long ago, said they. Yes, very long ago. There were many vampires in Peru, but they were all swallowed up in the year of the great earthquakes, when the Andes were lifted up, and there was left behind only one Alinche, who lived where the Amazon joins the Maranhão, and he would not eat dead bodies, no, only live ones, from which the blood would flow. Well, so far the legend. And that it had some foundation in fact is proved by the records of the district, which tell of more than one massacre of white gold seekers on the Maranhão by Indians whom they attempted to oust from the washings. But of the Erinche, the vampire, well, there is no official mention. Here, however, other local superstitions help us to the reading of the riddle of the man-lizard of the University of Berendwurst. When sacrifice was made to the vampire, the victim was bound in a canoe and taken down the river to a point where there was a kind of winding backwater, which had shelving banks of slimy mud, and at the end there was a rock with a cave in it. And here the canoe was left, and a very slow current flowed through the tortuous creek, and anything that was thrown into the water ultimately reached that cave. Some of the Indians had watched the canoes drifting along, a few yards only in an hour, and turning round and round as they drifted, and had seen them reach the cave and disappear within, and it had been a wonder to them, generation after generation, that the cave was never filled up. For all days long the sluggish current was flowing into it, carrying with it the flotsam of the river. And so they said that the cave was the entrance to hell, and bottomless. And one day a white man, a professor of that same University of Berendwurst, and a mighty hunter of beetles before the Lord, who lived with the Indians in friendship. He went up the backwater right into the entrance and set afloat inside the cave a little raft, heaped up with touchwood and knots of the oil tree, which he set fire to. And he saw the raft go creeping along all ablaze, and for an hour or more lighting up the wet walls of the cave as it went on either side. And then, it was put out. No, it did not go out suddenly as if it had upset or had floated over the edge of a waterfall, but it was as if it had been beaten out. For the burning fragments were flung to one side and another, and the pieces still alight glowed for a long time on the ledges and points of rock where they fell. And the cave was filled with the sound of a sudden wind, and the echoes of a noise as of great wings flapping. And at last, one day, this professor went into the cave himself. "I took," he wrote, "I took a large canoe, and from the bows I built a brazier of stout cask hoops, and behind it I set a gold-washing tin dish for a reflector, and I loaded the canoe with roots of the resin tree and oil wood and yams and dried meat, and I took spears with me, and some tipped with the orale poison that numbs but does not kill. And so I bravely drifted inside the cave, and I lit my fire, and with my pole I guided the canoe very cautiously through that tunnel. Before long it widened out, and creeping along one wall, I suddenly became aware of a moving of something on the opposite side. And so I turned the light fair upon it, and there upon a kind of ledge sat a beast. A beast with a head like a large grey dog. Its eyes were as large as a cow's. Now, what its shape was I could not see. As I looked, I began gradually to make out two huge bat-like wings. Its wings, and these were spread out to their utmost, as if the beast were on tiptoe and ready to fly. And so it was. For just as I had realized that I beheld before me some great bat reptile of a kind unknown to science, except as pre-Diluvian, and the shock had thrilled through me at the thought that I was actually in the presence of a living specimen of so-called extinct flying lizards of the flood. The thing launched itself upon the air, and the very next instant it was upon me. Clutching onto the canoe, it beat with its wings at the flame so furiously that it was all I could do to keep the canoe from capsizing. And taken by surprise, I was nearly stunned by the strength and rapidity of its blows before I even attempted to defend myself. By that time, seemingly half a minute had elapsed, and the brazier had been nearly emptied by the powerful brute, and the vampire, mistaking me no doubt for a victim of sacrifice, had already taken hold of me. The next instant I had driven a spear deep into its body, and with a prodigious tumult of wings, the thing loosed its claws from my clothes and dropped off into the stream. As quickly as possible I rekindled my light, and now I saw the Eerie, with wings outstretched upon the water, drifting along in the current. I followed it. Hour after hour, with my reflector turned full upon that grey dog's head with cow-like eyes, I passed along the dark and silent waterway. I ate and drank as I went along, but I did not dare to sleep. A day must have passed, and 2 nights. And then, as of course I had all along expected, I saw right ahead a grey eye-shaped light, and I knew that I was coming out into daylight again. The opening came nearer and nearer, and it was with intense eagerness that I gazed upon my trophy, the floating Eerie, the last of the winged reptiles. Already in imagination I saw myself the foremost of travelers of European fame, the hero of my day. What were the Banks kangaroos or Ducello's gorilla to my discovery of the last survivor of the pterodactyl creatures of the flood, the flying saurians of the pre-Noachian epoch of catastrophe and mud? Yes. Full of these thoughts, I had not noticed that the vampire was no longer moving. And suddenly the bow of the canoe bumped against it, and in an instant it had climbed onto the boat. Its great bat-like wings once more beat me and scattered the flaming brands, and the thing made a desperate effort to get past me back into the gloom. It had seen the daylight approaching, and rather than face the sun, preferred to fight. Now its ferocity was that of a maddened dog, but I kept it off with my pole, and seeing my opportunity as it clung, flapping its wings upon the bough, I gave it such a thrust as to make it drop off. It tried to swim. I then for the first time noticed its long neck, but with my pole I struck it on the head and I stunned it, and once more I saw it go drifting on the current with me into the daylight. What a relief it was to be out in the open air. It was noon, and as we passed out from under the entrance of the cave, the river blazed so in the sunlight that after the 2 days of almost total darkness, I was blinded for a time. I turned my canoe to the shore, to the shade of the trees, and throwing a noose over the floating body, I let it tow behind. Once more on terra firma, and in possession of the vampire, I dragged it out of the water. And what a hideous beast it looked, this winged kangaroo with a python's neck. But it was not dead. So I made a muzzle with a strip of skin, and then I firmly bound its wings together around its body. I lay down and I slept. And when I awoke, the next day was breaking. So having breakfasted, I dragged my captive into the canoe and went on down the river. Where I was, I had no idea. But I knew that I was going to the sea, going to Germany. That was enough. For 2 months now, I have been drifting with the current down this never-ending river. Of my adventures, of hostile natives, of rapids, of alligators and jaguars, I need say nothing. They are the common property of all travelers. But my vampire, it is still alive. And now I am devoured by only one ambition, to keep it alive. To let Europe actually gaze upon the living, breathing survivor of the great reptiles known to the human race before the days of Noah. The missing link between the reptile and the bird. To this end, I deny myself food, deny myself even precious medicine. In spite of itself, I gave it all my quinine. And when the miasma crept up the river at night, I covered it with my rug, and I lay exposed myself. Oh, if the black fever should seize me. 3 months now, still upon this hateful river. Will it never end? I have been ill, so ill that for 2 days I could not feed it. I had not the strength to go ashore to find food. I feared that it will die before I can get it home. Then ill again. The black fever now. But it is alive. I caught a vicuna swimming in the river, and it sucked it dry. Gallons of blood. It had been unfed 3 days. In its hungry haste, it broke its muzzle. I was almost too feeble to put it on again. A horrible thought possesses me now. Suppose it breaks its muzzle again when I am lying ill, delirious, and it is ravenous. Oh, the horror of it! To see it eating is terrible. It links the claws of its wings together. It cowers over the body. Its head is under the wings, out of sight. But the victim never moves. As soon as the vampire touches it, there seems to be a paralysis. Once those wings are linked, there is absolute quiet. Only the sound of sucking and heavy breathing. Horrible. Horrible. But in Germany, I shall be famous. In Germany with my vampire. I'm very feeble now. It broke its muzzle again, but it was in the daylight when it is blind. Its great eyes are blind in sunlight. It was a long struggle. Oh, this black fever. Oh, and the horror of this thing.
I am surely too weak now to kill it. If I would, I must get it home alive. Soon, surely soon, this cursed river will end. Oh God, does it never reach the sea? Reach white men, reach home? But if the thing attacks me, I will throttle it. If I am dying, I will throttle it. If we cannot go back to Germany alive, we will go together dead. I will throttle the thing with my 2 hands and fix my teeth in it, and our bones shall lie together on the banks of this accursed river.
This is nearly all that was recorded of the professor's diary, but it is enough to tell us of the final tragedy. 2 skeletons were found together on the very edge of that riverbank. Half of each, in the lapse of years, had been washed away in successive flood tides. The rest, when put together, made up the man-reptile which, to use a Rabelaisian phrase, metagrobolized all to nothing the University of Beerendwurst. You've just heard tonight's story from Storylink Radio's Countdown to Halloween 2022. Remember to come back for our next tale. Many more stories of all genres available to listen to and read along with now on our website at www.storylinkradio.com. Visit our YouTube channel at youtube.com/storylinkradio. And visit our podcast for easy mobile listening anywhere, anytime. Just search for Storylink Radio on your favorite podcast provider. Oh, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button and click that alert bell for Storylink Radio.